My father shares me with his friends. Those were the first words 15-year-old Nora Lane whispered to rancher Samuel Reed before confessing she'd killed 3 men, including her own father. Their bodies lay cooling in the creek behind his property, and her hands still trembled with the weight of what survival had cost her. This isn't a story about heroes or villains. It's about a girl who chose to live when dying seemed easier, and a weathered rancher who understood that sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. Before we begin, hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far Nora's story travels. Now, let's go back to where it started. The fence line had been Samuel Reed's morning ritual for 32 years. Every dawn, before the sun burned off the Texas mist, he'd walk the perimeter of his land with his rifle slung across his shoulders and his boots crunching through the dried mesquite. He knew every post, every wire, every place where the ground dipped or the grass grew different. So when he saw the wagon that Tuesday morning in late September, sitting crooked and abandoned about 40 yards from his eastern fence, his gut tightened before his mind caught up. The wagon wasn't just out of place, it was wrong. Samuel stopped walking and let his eyes adjust to the early light. The wagon sat at an angle, one wheel buried in soft earth like someone had driven it hard and fast before it gave up. No horses, no people. Just the wagon itself, canvas top torn and flapping in the wind that rolled across the plains like a living thing. He'd seen abandoned property before. Travelers who'd misjudged the distance between towns, families whose luck ran out, drifters who'd decided walking was easier than fixing what broke. But those wagons usually sat in the open, visible from the road. This one had been driven deliberately off the main trail, hidden in the shallow depression where Hackberry Creek curved through his land. Someone was hiding. Or someone was hiding something. Samuel shifted the rifle to his hands and started walking. His knees complained, they always did these days, but his eyes stayed sharp, scanning the ground for tracks, for movement, for anything that would tell him whether he was walking into trouble or just toward someone else's bad day. The tracks told him plenty. 3 horses, maybe 4, all shod. Wheels that had cut deep into the earth. Boot prints in the mud near the creek, some heading toward the water, some circling back toward the wagon. And then, about 10 yards from where the wagon sat, a different kind of mark, smaller, barefoot, running. Samuel crouched down and touched the edge of one footprint. The mud was still soft, recent. Within the last few hours, maybe less, his pulse kicked up a notch. "This is private property," he called out, his voice cutting through the morning quiet. "If you're hurt, I can help. If you're running, keep running. But if you're looking for trouble, you found it." Silence answered him. Just the wind and the creek and the sound of his own breathing. Samuel straightened and moved toward the wagon, rifle ready, but not raised. Threatening strangers was a good way to get shot by scared people, and he'd learned long ago that scared people were more dangerous than mean ones. The wagon's canvas cover hung in shreds. Inside he could see blankets, a broken crate, a woman's bonnet trampled into the dirt. There was dried blood on the wooden seat, dark and crusted, and the smell that came from inside made his stomach turn. Not death. Not yet. But violence. Recent and brutal. "I'm not here to hurt you," Samuel said again, quieter this time. "But I need to know who you are and why you're on my land." The wind shifted, carrying sound from the creek. A splash. Small. Deliberate. Samuel moved toward the water. Hackberry Creek wasn't much this time of year, barely 3 feet deep and maybe 10 feet across, running slow and brown between banks of mud and stone. Cottonwood trees hung over it in places, their leaves yellowing with the season. It was the kind of creek that dried up in droughts and flooded in storms, useful for watering cattle but not much else. Today, it held 3 dead men. They floated face down in the shallow water, arms spread wide like they were trying to swim and had forgotten how. The current pushed them gently against the rocks, turning them in slow circles. 2 of them wore range clothes, dust-covered shirts and denim pants and boots that looked expensive. The third wore a black vest over a white shirt that had once been fine but was now stained dark across the back. Samuel stopped at the creek's edge and stared. His mind cataloged details automatically. Bullet holes in 2 of them, knife work on the third. Fresh kills. Maybe 3 hours old, maybe 4. And sitting on the opposite bank, half hidden in the shadow of a cottonwood, was the girl. She couldn't have been more than 15, maybe 16, small-framed and hollow-eyed with dark hair that hung in tangled ropes around her face. She wore a torn dress that might have been blue once, and her feet were bare and bleeding. Her hands rested in her lap, and even from across the creek, Samuel could see they were shaking. She didn't run when she saw him, didn't scream or beg or try to hide. She just sat there, staring at him with eyes that had seen too much, and stopped caring about consequences. "They're dead," she said. Her voice was flat, empty. "I killed them." Samuel didn't move. His finger stayed off the trigger, but his mind was racing. 3 grown men, all armed by the look of the gun belts still strapped to their bodies. One girl, barely more than a child. The math didn't add up unless desperation had made her smart, or lucky, or both. "Why?" he asked. The girl's laugh was a broken sound, sharp and wrong. "Why? You want to know why?" "I do." She stood up slowly, wincing as she put weight on her feet. "Because they were going to kill me anyway. Just slower." Samuel kept his voice level. "Who were they?" "That one." She pointed at the man in the black vest. "That's my father, Thomas Lane. The other 2 were his friends, Miller and Cobb. They had names. I don't remember if they had souls." The words hit Samuel like cold water. Her father. This girl had killed her own father and 2 others, and she was standing there telling him about it like she was reciting a grocery list. "What did they do to you?" he asked quietly. Nora Lane, though he didn't know her name yet, tilted her head and studied him. "You really want to hear it? Or are you just trying to decide if I'm dangerous?" "Both." That almost made her smile. Almost. "My mother died 3 years ago. Cholera. After that, my father decided I was useful. To him. To his friends. To anyone who had money or whiskey or something he wanted." Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories like this before, too many of them. The frontier was full of men who saw women and children as property, as tools, as things to be used and discarded. The law didn't always protect the vulnerable out here. Sometimes it barely existed. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "Anywhere. They were taking me to a ranch up north, said they had a buyer. A man who wanted—" She stopped and shook her head. "It doesn't matter. We stopped here last night. They drank. They argued about how to split the money. And when they finally passed out, I took Miller's gun and I shot my father in the chest while he slept." She said it without emotion, without regret. Just fact. "Miller woke up when he heard the shot," she continued. "So I shot him too. Cobb tried to run, but I caught him at the creek. He was bigger than me, stronger, but I had the knife from the wagon and I didn't stop until he stopped moving." Samuel looked at the bodies again. The knife work on Cobb's back was brutal, multiple wounds, frenzied and desperate, the kind of violence that came from fear and rage mixed together. "Then what?" he asked. "Then I sat here and waited for the sun to come up. I didn't know what else to do." The girl, Nora, wrapped her arms around herself and looked away. "I thought maybe I'd just walk into the creek and keep walking. Let it take me wherever it goes. But I couldn't make my feet move." Samuel stood there for a long moment, weighing options. The law would call this murder. 3 counts. Didn't matter what they'd done to her. Didn't matter that she was defending herself. A girl who killed her own father wasn't going to find much sympathy in a Texas courtroom, especially not if those men had money or family or friends who wanted revenge. But the law wasn't here. He was. "You hurt?" he asked. Nora blinked, surprised by the question. "What?" "Are you injured besides your feet?" She looked down at herself like she was just noticing her body for the first time. "I don't know. Maybe. Does it matter?" "It does if you want help." "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Samuel shifted his weight and met her eyes across the creek. "I know enough. I know you're 15 years old and you've been through hell. I know those men down there got what they deserved, law or no law. And I know you're standing in my creek on my land, which makes you my problem, whether I like it or not." "I'm not your problem," Nora said sharply. "I'm nobody's problem anymore." "You are now," Samuel replied. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to cross this creek and come with me. I've got a ranch about a mile west. You'll get cleaned up, get your feet bandaged, and eat something. Then we'll figure out what comes next." Nora stared at him. "Just like that? You're not going to turn me in?" "To who? The nearest sheriff is 2 days' ride from here, and by the time anyone comes looking, those bodies will tell their own story. 3 armed men dead by the creek, 1 girl with torn clothes and bloody feet. Anyone with half a brain will see it for what it was. And if they don't?" Samuel's expression hardened. "Then they'll have to go through me first." The girl studied him for a long moment, searching his face for lies or traps or hidden intentions. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly and stepped into the creek. The water came up to her knees. She moved carefully, testing each step, and Samuel could see fresh blood mixing with the creek water where the rocks cut her feet. When she reached the bank on his side, he offered his hand. She didn't take it. Instead, she climbed out on her own, dripping and shivering despite the morning warmth. Up close, she looked even younger than 15. The kind of young that should have been worried about ribbons and dances, not survival and murder. "What's your name?" Samuel asked. "Nora. Nora Lane." "Samuel Reed. This is my land, and as of right now, you're under my protection. Nobody touches you, nobody threatens you, and nobody asks questions you don't want to answer. Understood?" Nora's eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears back hard. "Why?" "Because somebody should have protected you before. Since they didn't, I will." They walked back to the wagon in silence. Samuel kept his rifle ready and his eyes on the horizon, watching for riders or movement or anything that might mean trouble was coming faster than he'd expected. Nora limped beside him, leaving bloody footprints in the dust. When they reached the wagon, Samuel did a quick search. He found rope, blankets, a box of ammunition, and a leather satchel stuffed with money. More money than men like that should have had, honestly. "They robbed someone," Nora said quietly. "Last week, a family heading to California, killed the father, took everything they had." Samuel nodded and put the money in his coat pocket. "You know where that family is now?" "The mother and kids? They left them by the road. I think they were heading to Fort Worth, but I'm not sure." "I'll make sure this finds them," Samuel said, "or someone who needs it more than dead thieves do." He gathered what was useful from the wagon, blankets, rope, a canteen, and left the rest. Let scavengers or weather take care of it. Some things weren't worth salvaging. "Can you walk?" he asked Nora. She nodded, though her face was pale with pain. "We'll take it slow. My ranch isn't far." They walked west across the open grassland, away from the creek and the dead men and the broken wagon. The sun climbed higher, burning off the mist and heating the air. Grasshoppers jumped in the tall grass, and somewhere overhead, a hawk circled on the thermals. Samuel's ranch came into view after about 20 minutes, a low house built from stone and timber, a barn that had seen better days, corrals for horses and cattle, and a windmill that creaked in the constant wind. It wasn't much, but it was his, paid for with 30 years of hard work and careful living. "Stay here," he told Nora when they reached the barn. "I need to check something." He went into the house quickly, making sure it was empty and secure. When he came back out, he carried a basin of water, clean cloths, bandages, and a bottle of whiskey. "Barn or house?" he asked. Nora looked at the house, then at the barn. "Barn. I don't want to be inside walls right now." Samuel understood. "Barn it is." He led her to the far end where the hay was stacked and the light came through the gaps in the boards. It was warm and dry and smelled like animals and earth. He set the basin down and pointed to a bale of hay. "Sit. Let me look at your feet." Nora sat carefully, and Samuel knelt in front of her. Her feet were a mess, cut and bruised and swollen. He cleaned them gently, using the water and cloths, and she didn't make a sound even when he had to pull gravel out of the deeper cuts. "This is going to hurt," he said, holding up the whiskey. "Everything hurts," Nora replied. "Go ahead." He poured the alcohol over the wounds, and she went rigid but stayed silent. He wrapped her feet in clean bandages and tied them off. "You'll need to stay off them for a few days," he said. "Let them heal." "I can work," Nora said quickly. "I won't take charity. If I'm staying here, I'll earn it." Samuel sat back on his heels and studied her. You ever worked a ranch before? No, but I can learn. What can you do? Cook, clean, mend clothes. I can read and write and do numbers. And I can shoot, apparently. Her voice turned bitter on the last part. Samuel stood and wiped his hands on his pants. Here's the deal. You rest today and tomorrow. After that, if you want to work, we'll find things for you to do. But you're not a servant here, and you're not paying off some debt. You're staying because it's safer than out there, and I'm offering because it's the right thing to do. Clear? Nora's chin trembled. What if someone comes looking? Let them come. You don't understand. These men, they have friends, family, people who will want revenge or the money or just answers. Samuel crossed his arms. Then they'll get answers. The truth. Your father sold you. His friends helped. You defended yourself. If they don't like that truth, they can take it up with me. And if they bring guns, I've got guns too, and I've been using them longer than whoever they send. Nora looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Why would you risk that? For me? You don't even know me. Samuel walked to the barn door and looked out at his land, the endless grass, the distant hills, the sky that went on forever. I had a daughter once, he said quietly. She'd be about your age now if she'd lived. Fever took her when she was 7, took her mother too, same winter. He turned back to face Nora. I couldn't protect them. Disease doesn't care how much you love someone or how hard you try. But this I can do. I can make sure one girl doesn't suffer because the men around her are monsters. Nora's face crumpled, and for the first time since Samuel had found her, she cried. Not delicate tears or quiet sniffles, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She buried her face in her hands and let out all the fear and pain and rage she'd been holding inside. Samuel let her cry. He didn't try to comfort her or tell her it would be okay. He just stood there and waited, giving her the space to fall apart. When the tears finally slowed, Nora wiped her face on her torn sleeve and looked up at him. I'm sorry. For what? For crying, for being weak. You killed 3 grown men to save your own life, Samuel said flatly. Don't ever call yourself weak again. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Samuel brought her bread and dried meat from the house, along with a canteen of fresh water. She ate slowly, like she wasn't sure the food was real, or if it might disappear if she enjoyed it too much. There's a creek behind the house, Samuel said, cleaner than the one where I found you. When you're ready, you can wash up properly. I'll find you some clothes that fit better than what you're wearing. Nora looked down at her ruined dress. These were my mother's. She made this dress for me before she died. We'll keep it then, Samuel said gently. Clean it up, mend what we can, but you'll need something sturdier for ranch work. I don't have anything else. You will. Over the next few hours, Samuel set about making Nora's temporary stay more permanent without saying so out loud. He found an old chest in the attic that had belonged to his wife and daughter. Dresses, shirts, work pants, boots. Most of it was too big, but it could be altered. He brought blankets to the barn and set up a proper sleeping area in the tack room where it was private and warm. Nora watched him work with quiet suspicion, like she was waiting for him to ask for payment or reveal some hidden motive. But Samuel just kept working, methodical and practical, treating her presence like any other ranch problem that needed solving. By afternoon, riders appeared on the eastern horizon. Samuel saw them coming from half a mile away, 3 men on horseback, moving at a steady pace toward his property. His stomach dropped. Too soon. Someone had found the bodies already, or these men had been expected to meet up with Lane and his friends. Either way, trouble had arrived faster than he'd hoped. Nora, he called into the barn. We've got company. Stay in the tack room and don't come out unless I call for you. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Who is it? Don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Samuel grabbed his rifle and walked out to meet the riders. He positioned himself in front of the barn, standing easy but alert, the rifle resting in the crook of his arm. Not threatening, but not harmless either. The 3 men reined up about 20 feet away. They were range types, hard-looking men in their 30s and 40s, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that measured threats automatically. The one in front wore a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. "Help you, gentlemen?" Samuel asked. The deputy leaned forward in his saddle. "Name's Pickett, deputy from Colton. We're looking for some men who went missing, Thomas Lane and 2 others. You seen them? Samuel's face stayed neutral. Might have. What's your interest? Lane's brother reported them overdue, said they were passing through this area, were checking ranches and homesteads. Lane have a daughter? Samuel asked. Pickett's eyes narrowed. He did. Why? Because I found 3 dead men by my creek this morning. One of them had papers in his pocket with the name Thomas Lane. If that's who you're looking for, you'll find them about a mile east of here. The 3 men exchanged glances. One of them, a scarred man with cold eyes, spoke up. Dead? All 3. All 3, Samuel confirmed. How? Pickett demanded. Shot. One of them stabbed. Looked like they were attacked while camping. The scarred man's hand drifted toward his gun. And the girl? Where's the girl? Samuel's grip on his rifle tightened imperceptibly. What girl would that be? Lane's daughter, Nora. She was traveling with them. Haven't seen any girl, Samuel lied smoothly. Just the bodies and an empty wagon. If she was with them, she's long gone now. Pickett studied Samuel's face, looking for tells. You mind if we look around, just to be sure? I mind very much, Samuel said, his voice hardening. This is private property, and I don't take kindly to people searching my home without cause. I told you where the bodies are. You want to investigate, start there. The scarred man sneered. Big words for an old man living alone. Old doesn't mean helpless, Samuel replied quietly. And I'm not asking you to leave, I'm telling you. The tension stretched tight between them. 3 armed men against 1. Bad odds. But Samuel had the advantage of knowing his own land and being willing to die on it if necessary. Pickett raised a hand, stopping his companions from escalating. Easy. We're not here for trouble, we just want to find out what happened. Then go look at the bodies, Samuel repeated. You'll find your answers there. And if we find the girl? The scarred man pressed. Samuel met his eyes directly. Then you ask her what happened before you make assumptions. That's how justice works. Pickett nodded slowly and gathered his reins. We'll check the site. If we have more questions, we'll be back. You do that. The 3 men turned their horses and rode east toward the creek. Samuel watched them go, his heart pounding but his face calm. He waited until they disappeared over the rise before letting out a long breath. Behind him, Nora emerged from the barn. They're going to come back. Probably, Samuel agreed. And when they do? We tell them the truth. Most of it, anyway. Nora shook her head. They won't believe me. They'll say I murdered them. Maybe. But I'll be standing next to you when you tell it, and my word carries weight in this county. I've lived here 30 years. I pay my taxes. I don't cause trouble. People listen when I talk. That scarred man, Nora said quietly. His name is Dutch Carver. He rode with my father sometimes. He's one of the ones who... She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Samuel's expression went cold. Then he's got his own reasons for wanting you quiet. All the more reason to make sure you're protected. They stood there in the afternoon sun, an old rancher and a broken girl, both knowing that the real fight was just beginning. The riders didn't return that day, but Samuel knew better than to mistake silence for safety. He spent the rest of the afternoon preparing his ranch like a man expecting siege. He checked his ammunition, cleaned his rifles, and made sure the shotgun by the front door was loaded and within easy reach. He moved supplies into the barn where Nora was staying, water, food, blankets, a loaded revolver he showed her how to use properly. You squeeze the trigger, don't pull it, he explained, demonstrating with an unloaded weapon. And you aim for the biggest part of the body, center mass. Don't try for fancy shots. Nora held the gun awkwardly, her hands still trembling slightly. I don't want to shoot anyone else. Then pray you don't have to, Samuel said. But if it comes down to your life or theirs, you already know which choice to make. She looked at him with those hollow eyes. Does it get easier? The killing? No, Samuel said honestly. And if it ever does, that's when you need to worry about your soul. That night, Nora finally bathed in the creek behind the house, while Samuel kept watch from the porch. She emerged clean for the first time in weeks, wearing one of his wife's old dresses that hung loose on her thin frame. Her dark hair, washed and combed, fell past her shoulders, and without the dirt and blood, she looked even younger than before. They ate dinner in silence, beans and cornbread and coffee so strong it could strip paint. Nora ate like someone who'd forgotten what full felt like, and Samuel kept refilling her plate without comment. "Where will I sleep?" she asked when the meal was finished. "Tack room in the barn like I showed you. Door locks from the inside. You'll be safe there." "And you?" "House. But I'm a light sleeper, and I'll hear if anything moves out there." Nora studied him across the table. "You really think they'll come back?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," Samuel said. "Men like Dutch Carver don't let things go. And if your father had friends or family who cared about him, or about the money he was carrying, they'll want answers. Maybe revenge." "I can leave," Nora offered quietly. "Tonight. Before they come back. You've done enough. You don't need to, No." Samuel's voice was firm. "You leave now. You won't make it 3 days. You've got no money, no supplies, no shoes that fit, and feet that can barely carry you across a room. Where would you go?" "Anywhere. It doesn't matter." "It does matter. Because anywhere you go, you'll be alone and hunted and vulnerable. Here, at least, you've got walls and weapons and someone who'll fight for you." Nora's eyes filled with tears again. "Why? Why would you fight for me? You don't owe me anything." Samuel stood and collected the dishes, his movements slow and deliberate. "My daughter's name was Charlotte. She was 7 when the fever took her. Before she died, she asked me why people hurt each other. Why some folks were mean and others were kind. I didn't have an answer then, and I don't have one now." He set the dishes in the basin and turned to face Nora. "But I know this. The world's got enough people willing to hurt those who can't defend themselves. It needs more people willing to stand in the way. So that's what I'm doing, standing in the way." Nora wiped her eyes roughly. "I killed my own father. You killed a man who was selling you like livestock. That he was your father just makes what he did worse, not what you did. The law won't see it that way." "Then the law is wrong," Samuel said flatly. "And I've been around long enough to know the law is wrong about a lot of things." They settled into an uneasy routine that night. Nora locked herself in the tack room with the revolver under her pillow. Samuel sat on his porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness and listening to the sounds of the prairie, coyotes calling in the distance, the windmill creaking, the constant whisper of wind through grass. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every shadow might be a rider. Every sound might be approaching trouble. Dawn came slow and red, painting the sky the color of warning. Samuel was making coffee when he heard the horses. 6 of them this time, coming from the east in a loose formation. He recognized Deputy Pickett in the lead, but the others were new faces. Harder faces. The kind of men who hired out their guns and didn't ask questions about who they were shooting. Dutch Carver rode beside Pickett, his scarred face set in grim satisfaction. Samuel stepped off the porch with his rifle and waited. The riders pulled up in a semicircle, boxing him in against the house. Pickett looked uncomfortable. The others looked eager. "We found the bodies," Pickett said without preamble. "Just like you said, 3 men shot and stabbed, the wagon ransacked, and signs of a struggle." "That's what I told you you'd find," Samuel replied calmly. "What you didn't tell me," Pickett continued, his voice hardening, "is that you're hiding Lane's daughter. We found tracks leading from the creek to your property. Small feet, barefoot, fresh." Samuel's expression didn't change. "I found a girl by the creek. She was injured and scared. I gave her shelter. That's not hiding. That's basic human decency." Dutch Carver spat into the dirt. "Human decency, my ass. You're harboring a murderer." "I'm protecting a child who defended herself against 3 grown men who were abusing her," Samuel shot back. "There's a difference." One of the hired guns, a lean man with dead eyes, spoke up. "The girl's got no right to claim self-defense. She shot them while they slept. That's murder in any court." "And what they were doing to her," Samuel demanded. "What do you call that?" "Not our concern," the man replied. "Law says—" "I know what the law says," Samuel interrupted. "I also know what's right. And I'm not handing that girl over to a lynch mob disguised as justice." Pickett raised his hands. "Nobody's talking about lynching. We just want to question her, get her statement, let the courts decide." "Court's 2 days' ride from here," Samuel said. "Courts where she'll be locked in a cell with men like these," he gestured at the hired guns, "standing guard. You really think she'll make it to trial? The silence that followed answered his question better than words. Dutch Carver's hand moved toward his gun. You're making this harder than it needs to be, old man. Just bring the girl out and we'll be on our way. No. That's not a request. Samuel raised his rifle slightly, not pointing it at anyone specifically, but making his intentions clear. And this isn't a negotiation. The girl stays here. You want to take her, you'll have to go through me. There's 6 of us, one of the hired guns pointed out. I can count, Samuel replied. Question is whether you're willing to be the first one I shoot. Tension crackled through the air like electricity before a storm. Horses shifted nervously. Hands hovered near weapons. Deputy Pickett looked between Samuel and Dutch Carver, clearly calculating whether this was worth bloodshed. Then Nora stepped out of the barn. No, Samuel said sharply. Get back inside. But she ignored him, walking forward with her chin up and her shoulders squared despite the fear Samuel could see in every line of her body. She wore the oversized dress and bandaged feet, and her hands were empty of weapons. I'm Nora Lane, she said, her voice steady. And I killed those men. All 3 of them. Dutch Carver smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Samuel had seen in years. Well now, that's what we wanted to hear. You're coming with us, girl. No, she's not, Samuel said. Nora looked at him. It's okay. I'll tell them what happened. You'll die before you reach town, Samuel interrupted. You think these men care about justice? They care about making sure you never get to tell your story to anyone who matters. He's protecting you because he's soft, Dutch said to Nora. But soft doesn't survive out here. Come quiet, and maybe we won't burn his ranch down around him. Samuel's rifle came up fast, pointed directly at Dutch's chest. Try it. Samuel, don't, Nora started. I said get back in the barn, Samuel ordered, his eyes never leaving Dutch. But before anyone could move, another voice cut through the tension. What in the hell is going on here? All heads turned to see a 7th rider approaching from the west. A woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She rode a black mare with the confidence of someone who'd been born in a saddle, and she carried a Winchester rifle across her lap like it was part of her anatomy. Samuel recognized her immediately and felt a surge of relief. Martha. Martha Conway was the closest thing to law that mattered in this part of Texas. She owned the largest ranch in the county, employed half the cowhands within 50 miles, and had a reputation for fairness that was matched only by her reputation for not tolerating fools. If there was anyone who could shift the balance of this standoff, it was her. She reined up beside Deputy Pickett and surveyed the scene with sharp eyes. Pickett, you want to explain why you've got 6 armed men surrounding Samuel Reed's property? Pickett shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, we're here on official business, looking for a suspect in 3 murders. That girl there? Martha nodded toward Nora. Yes, ma'am, Nora Lane. She admitted to killing her father and 2 others. Martha looked at Nora, taking in the bandaged feet, the too large dress, the hollow eyes. Then she looked at the men surrounding Samuel's house, really looked at them, reading their body language and intentions like a rancher reads weather. Dutch Carver, she said flatly, I thought I told you not to show your face in this county again, after that business with the Henderson girl. Dutch's scarred face flushed with anger. That was never proven. Didn't need to be proven. I know what you are. Martha turned back to Pickett. And you brought him to question a 15-year-old girl about defending herself against men who were abusing her? What the hell were you thinking? Now wait a minute, Pickett started. No, you wait, Martha cut him off. I knew Thomas Lane. He was a drunk and a cheat and worse things I won't say in polite company. If his daughter killed him, I guarantee she had cause. Good cause. One of the hired guns spoke up. That's not for you to decide, Mrs. Conway. Martha turned her cold gaze on him. And who exactly are you? Name's Pike. I work for... I don't care who you work for, Martha interrupted. This is my county, and in my county, we don't terrorize children because their fathers were monsters. Now I'm going to make this real simple. You all are going to turn around and ride back to wherever you came from, and you're going to leave that girl alone. With all respect, ma'am, Pickett said carefully, I've got a duty to investigate. Then investigate, Martha replied. But you do it proper. You file your report, you talk to the circuit judge when he comes through next month, and you let the girl give her statement in a safe place with witnesses who won't threaten her. You don't drag her off with hired guns and a man like Dutch Carver who's got his own reasons for wanting her silent. Dutch's hand moved toward his gun. You're making accusations. I'm stating facts, Martha said, and her rifle shifted slightly in his direction. And if you reach for that gun, Dutch, I'll put a hole in you wide enough to drive a wagon through. The hired guns exchanged glances. They might have been willing to face down an old rancher, but Martha Conway was different. She had money, power, connections, and 50 armed cowhands who'd ride to her defense without question. Pickett, sensing the tide turning, tried one more time. Mrs. Conway, the law. The law says that girl has a right to defend herself, Martha said firmly. The law says she's entitled to a fair hearing, not a mob. And the law says that if you try to take her against her will before proper procedures are followed, you're no better than kidnappers. She let that sink in, then continued. Now I'm going to ride back to my ranch and write a letter to the territorial governor. I'm going to explain how Deputy Pickett showed remarkable restraint and good judgment by not allowing a potential witness to be intimidated by interested parties. I'm going to recommend him for commendation. Pickett blinked, confused. That is, Martha added sweetly, unless Deputy Pickett does something remarkably stupid in the next 5 minutes that would require me to write a very different letter. One that mentions corruption, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Pickett's face went through several colors before settling on resigned pale. He knew when he was beaten. Mrs. Conway, I appreciate your input. Perhaps we should table this matter until the circuit judge arrives. Perhaps you should, Martha agreed. Dutch Carver wasn't ready to give up. Lane's brother can want all he likes, Martha said coldly. But if he shows up here making threats, he'll answer to me. And unlike his brother, he's got enough sense to know that's a fight he'll lose. She turned her horse slightly, addressing all the riders. This girl stays with Samuel Reed until proper legal proceedings can be arranged. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. Anyone who tries to take matters into their own hands will find themselves facing charges, and anyone who so much as rides within a mile of this property uninvited will find themselves on the wrong end of my ranch hands' rifles. Are we clear? The hired guns nodded reluctantly. Pickett nodded. Even Dutch, though his face was twisted with rage, eventually jerked his chin in acknowledgement. Good, Martha said. Now get off Samuel's land before I change my mind about being civil. The riders turned and left, Dutch Carver shooting one last venomous look at Nora before spurring his horse into a gallop. When they were finally out of sight, Samuel lowered his rifle and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Martha dismounted and walked over to him. You planning to adopt every stray that wanders onto your property, Samuel? Just the ones being hunted by men like Dutch Carver, Samuel replied. Martha looked at Nora, who stood frozen by the barn, clearly unsure whether this new arrival was friend or foe. Come here, child. Nora approached slowly, and Martha studied her with the same careful attention she'd give to evaluating livestock, not unkindly, but thoroughly. Your father really sell you? Martha asked bluntly. Nora flinched but nodded. Yes, ma'am. And those men with him participated? Yes, ma'am. And you killed all 3? Yes, ma'am. Nora's voice was barely a whisper now. Martha nodded once, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. Good. World's better off without them. She turned to Samuel. You sure you know what you're taking on here? This isn't going to blow over. Lane's got family, friends, people who'll make this personal. I know, Samuel said. And you're willing to risk your ranch, your reputation, maybe your life for a girl you just met? I am. Martha studied him for a long moment, then smiled slightly. Your wife would be proud. Sarah always said you were too stubborn to know when to quit. She also said stubbornness was a virtue if applied correctly. That she did. Martha walked back to her horse and pulled herself into the saddle with practiced ease. I meant what I said. Girl stays here until the judge comes through. That gives us about 4 weeks to get her story straight and make sure she's got proper representation. You know a lawyer who'd take her case? Samuel asked. I know a lawyer who owes me favors. I'll send word. She gathered her reins, then paused. One more thing. You need help. You send word to my ranch. I'll have men here within an hour. I appreciate that, Martha. Don't appreciate it. Just don't be too proud to use it. She looked at Nora one more time. You've got a chance here, girl. Don't waste it feeling sorry for yourself. Samuel's giving you something rare, a second chance. Make it count. With that, Martha rode off toward the western hills, leaving Samuel and Nora alone in the morning sun. Nora stood very still, processing everything that had just happened. She believed me. Martha's good at reading people, Samuel said, and she knew your father's reputation. What about the others, Dutch and those men? They'll come back. Probably not, Samuel said, walking back toward the house. Not with Martha watching. She's got too much power in this county. Anyone who crosses her finds themselves blacklisted. Can't get work, can't buy supplies, can't do business. It's not worth it to them. But Dutch is a coward when he's not holding all the cards, Samuel said. He'll make noise, but he won't act, not directly. Nora followed him onto the porch, limping on her bandaged feet. You can't know that for sure. No, Samuel admitted. I can't, but I can prepare for it, and that's what we're going to do. Over the next several days, Samuel taught Nora how to survive, not just physically, but mentally. He showed her how to shoot properly, how to reload quickly, how to read the land for signs of approaching riders. He taught her which sounds were normal and which meant danger. He explained how to barricade the barn, where to hide if she had to run, which neighbors could be trusted and which couldn't. But more importantly, he taught her how to work. Nora threw herself into ranch tasks with desperate intensity, as if staying busy could keep her mind from circling back to what she'd done. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, hauled water, mended fences, mucked out stalls. Her bandaged feet slowed her down at first, but she refused to rest. You'll hurt yourself, Samuel warned when he found her trying to carry a bucket of grain that was clearly too heavy. I need to be useful, Nora replied, struggling with the weight. You need to be smart, Samuel corrected, taking the bucket from her. Useful doesn't mean destroying yourself trying to prove something. I'm not trying to prove anything. Yes, you are. You're trying to prove you deserve to be here, that you're worth the risk I'm taking. Samuel set the bucket down and faced her. But you don't have to prove that. You already deserve safety. You already deserve kindness. You don't earn those things. They're your right as a human being. Nora's eyes filled with tears. My father used to say I had to earn everything. My food, my bed, his attention. Samuel's jaw tightened. Your father was wrong about a lot of things. That especially. They worked in silence for a while, falling into the rhythm of shared labor. Samuel found himself watching Nora when she didn't notice, seeing how she moved, how she approached tasks. She was smart and quick to learn, but there was a fragility underneath the determination, like glass that had cracked but not yet shattered. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, and Samuel told her stories about his wife and daughter, about the life he'd built here, the hard winters and good summers, the way the land changed with the seasons. Nora listened hungrily, as if she were storing up these stories against some future emptiness. What was your wife like? She asked one night. Strong, Samuel said after a moment. Stronger than me in most ways. She came out here from Boston, can you believe that? City girl who'd never seen a cow up close. But she learned, adapted, made this place a home instead of just a house. Did she like it, living out here? Samuel smiled at the memory. She said the silence scared her at first, too much space, too much sky. But after a while, she said she couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Said the city felt like being in a cage. I know that feeling, Nora said quietly. The cage part. You do, Samuel agreed. But you're out now. Am I? Or am I just in a different kind of cage? Samuel considered that. I suppose that depends on whether you're staying because you're trapped or because you're choosing to. One's a cage, the other's just a decision. Nora pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. I don't know how to make decisions anymore. For so long, everything was decided for me. Where to go, what to do, who to... She trailed off, unable to finish. Then start small, Samuel suggested. Tomorrow morning, you decide what to have for breakfast. You decide which chores to do first. You decide when to rest. Little choices. They add up. And the big choices, like what happens when the judge comes? We'll figure that out together, Samuel said. You won't face it alone. On the 5th morning after the standoff, Samuel woke to find Nora already up and working. She'd collected the eggs, fed the animals, and started breakfast, beans and bacon and coffee that was actually drinkable. You didn't have to do all this, Samuel said, sitting down at the table. I wanted to, Nora replied, serving him a plate. You were right about the small choices. It feels good, deciding things. They ate in comfortable silence, and Samuel found himself thinking that this quiet routine, this shared space, felt right in a way nothing had since Sarah and Charlotte died. Not replacement, not forgetting, just continuation. After breakfast, Nora asked if she could learn to ride. Samuel looked at her bandaged feet, which were healing but still tender. You sure? I need to know how, she said. In case I have to run again. You won't have to run. But if I do, I need to be ready. Samuel couldn't argue with that logic. He brought out his gentlest horse, an old mare named Patience, who'd outlived 2 of his other horses and had the temperament of a grandmother. He showed Nora how to approach, how to mount, how to sit in the saddle. Nora was terrified at first, perched high above the ground on an animal that could kill her with one kick. But gradually, as Patience plodded around the corral with Samuel walking beside them, she began to relax. She's so big, Nora marveled. 1,200 pounds, Samuel agreed, but gentle as they come. She'll take care of you. By afternoon, Nora was riding on her own, just walking circles around the corral, but riding nonetheless. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by something Samuel hadn't seen before. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. When she finally dismounted, her legs were shaky and she was grinning. That was amazing, she said breathlessly. You're a natural, Samuel told her. Another week, and you'll be ready to ride the property. The moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Samuel's hand went immediately to his rifle, but he relaxed slightly when he recognized the rider. It was one of Martha Conway's cowhands, a young man named Jesse who'd worked for her for years. Mr. Reed, Jesse called out, reining up by the fence. Mrs. Conway sent me with a message. What is it? Jesse dismounted and pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. Letter came from town. Dutch Carver's been running his mouth about the girl. Says Lane's brother is coming out from Kansas. Should be here within the week. Samuel took the letter and read it quickly. Martha's handwriting was neat and precise, but the message was grim. Lane's brother, Marcus, was a bounty hunter with a reputation for violence. He'd already sent word that he was coming to collect his niece and see justice done for his brother's murder. Martha wants you to know she's got your back, Jesse continued, but she says you should prepare for trouble. Marcus Lane doesn't play by rules. Samuel folded the letter and tucked it in his pocket. Tell Martha I appreciate the warning and the support. Jesse nodded and remounted. She also said if you need men, just say the word. She'll send 20 armed cowhands and dare Marcus Lane to try something. After Jesse left, Samuel turned to find Nora standing very still, all the joy from her riding lesson drained from her face. He's coming for me, she said. He's coming to try, Samuel corrected. There's a difference. You don't understand. Marcus Lane is worse than my father ever was. He's the one who taught my father how to see people as property, how to use them. Samuel's expression hardened. Then we'll be ready for him. But Nora shook her head. You can't fight him. He'll kill you. He'll burn this place to the ground and take me anyway, and you'll die for nothing. It won't be for nothing, Samuel said quietly, and I'm not planning on dying. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Samuel checked every weapon, cleaned every rifle, counted ammunition. He reinforced the barn's defenses and created fallback positions. He sent word to his nearest neighbors, sparse as they were, to watch for strangers. That night, as they sat on the porch in the darkness, Nora spoke softly. I should leave before he gets here. It would be safer for you. We've had this conversation, Samuel reminded her. I know, but I mean it. You've done so much already. You've given me a chance, but I can't let you die for me. Samuel was quiet for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief and new determination. When Charlotte was dying, I sat by her bed for 3 days straight, held her hand, tried to will the fever away. It didn't work. She died anyway. And for years after, I tortured myself thinking about all the things I should have done differently. Should have called the doctor sooner, should have had better medicine, should have. He turned to look at Nora. But the truth is, there was nothing I could have done. The fever came and it took her, and all my should-haves wouldn't have changed that. This, though, this I can change. I can stand between you and harm. I can make sure one girl gets the chance my daughter never had. So no, Nora, you're not leaving, and I'm not backing down. Whatever comes, we face it together. Nora was crying silently, tears streaming down her face in the starlight. I don't know how to thank you. Then don't try. Just live. That'll be thanks enough. They sat together in the darkness, an old rancher and a rescued girl, waiting for the storm they both knew was coming. Marcus Lane arrived on the 6th day, and he didn't come alone. Samuel spotted them from the ridge where he'd been watching the eastern approach since dawn, 8 riders moving in tight formation, disciplined and purposeful. Not the ragtag collection of hired guns that Dutch Carver had assembled, but professional men who knew their business. The kind who got paid well because they delivered results. Marcus Lane rode at the front, and even from a distance Samuel could see the family resemblance. Tall like his brother Thomas had been, but harder somehow, like whatever humanity Thomas had possessed had been burned out of Marcus years ago. He wore black from hat to boots, and the rifle across his saddle wasn't for show. Samuel rode back to the ranch faster than was wise, pushing his horse hard across the uneven ground. Nora was in the barn practicing her shooting, firing at tin cans Samuel had set up along the fence line. She'd gotten better over the past week, her hands steadier, her aim truer. But target practice and real violence were different countries entirely. They're here, Samuel said, dismounting quickly. 8 men. Maybe 10 minutes out. Nora's face went pale, but she didn't panic. She'd learned that much at least, how to hold herself together when fear threatened to overwhelm. What do we do? You get in the tack room like we planned. Lock the door. Don't come out unless I call for you or unless you hear me fall. If that happens, you take Patience and you ride west to Martha's ranch. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just ride. Samuel, no arguments. We planned this. Now move. Nora hesitated for one more second, then threw her arms around him in a quick, fierce embrace before running to the barn. Samuel watched her go, then turned toward the house to collect his weapons and his nerve. By the time Marcus Lane and his men rode into the yard, Samuel was standing on his porch with his rifle in hand and his shotgun leaning against the doorframe within easy reach. He'd positioned himself so his back was to the wall, and he had clear sight lines in all directions. Not perfect defensive ground, but the best he could manage. The riders fanned out in a loose semicircle, close enough to be threatening, but far enough to make it difficult for Samuel to cover them all with one weapon. Professional positioning. These men had done this before. Marcus Lane dismounted slowly, deliberately, making a show of his confidence. Up close, he looked older than Samuel had expected, maybe 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. But there was nothing soft about him. He moved like a man who'd spent his life doing violence and had gotten comfortable with it. Samuel Reed, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. That's right. I'm Marcus Lane. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Samuel kept his voice level. I don't have anything of yours. My niece, Nora, my brother's daughter. Marcus pulled off his riding gloves slowly, tucking them into his belt. I've come to collect her and take her back to Kansas where she belongs. She's not going anywhere with you. Marcus smiled, and it was worse than Dutch Carver's had been. Colder. More certain. That's not your decision to make, Mr. Reed. She's family. My responsibility now that my brother's dead. Your brother was selling her, Samuel said flatly, trading her to his friends, using her like property. If that's your idea of family, she's better off an orphan. One of the riders, a thick-shouldered man with a scarred jaw, started to reach for his gun, but Marcus raised a hand to stop him. Careful with accusations, Mr. Reed. My brother had his faults, but he loved his daughter. Whatever story the girl told you, she's confused. Traumatized. She doesn't know what she's saying. She knows exactly what she's saying, Samuel replied. And she's old enough to remember what was done to her, old enough to defend herself when 3 men tried to sell her to the highest bidder. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Self-defense. That's the story you're going with? It's not a story. It's the truth. Truth is flexible, Mr. Reed. Depends on who's telling it. Marcus took a step closer, his boots crunching in the dirt. Here's my truth. My brother and two of his friends were murdered by a disturbed girl who then fled the scene. You found her, and for reasons I can't quite figure, decided to hide her instead of turning her over to the proper authorities. The proper authorities came by, Samuel said. Deputy Pickett. We had a conversation. He agreed to wait for the circuit judge. Pickett's a coward who bends whichever way the wind blows. And I hear Martha Conway stuck her nose in where it doesn't belong. Marcus shook his head. But Martha's not here now. It's just you and me and my men. So I'm going to ask you one more time, politely, to bring my niece out here so we can settle this family matter and be on our way. And I'm going to tell you one more time, Samuel said, his finger moving to rest alongside the trigger guard of his rifle. She's not going with you. Not today. Not ever. The men behind Marcus shifted in their saddles. Samuel could feel the tension coiling tighter, like a rope being wound before it snaps. Someone was going to make a move soon, and when they did, people were going to die. Marcus seemed to sense it too. He held up his hand again, keeping his men in check. You're what, 60? 65? You really want to die over some girl you barely know? I'm 62, Samuel said. And yes, why? What is she to you? Samuel thought about Charlotte, about Sarah, about all the ways the world had taken from him and left him empty. He thought about Nora's hollow eyes that first morning by the creek, about the way she'd started to smile when she learned to ride, about the small victories of choosing her own breakfast. She's someone who deserves better than what she got, Samuel said simply. That's enough. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then sighed like a man facing an unpleasant but necessary task. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I've got 8 men. You've got what? A rifle and stubbornness? This doesn't end well for you. Maybe not, Samuel acknowledged. But I guarantee it doesn't end well for you either. You come at me. I'm taking you down first. That's a promise. Your men might kill me after, but you won't see it happen. The man with the scarred jaw spoke up. Marcus, let me just... No. Marcus cut him off without looking away from Samuel. Mr. Reed here thinks he's defending honor or justice or some other noble notion. I respect that, even if I think he's a fool. He raised his voice slightly. Nora, I know you can hear me, girl. Come on out here and let's talk. Uncle Marcus isn't angry. I just want to make sure you're safe. Silence answered him. Samuel felt a surge of relief that Nora was following instructions, staying hidden. Marcus waited a few more seconds, then continued in that same reasonable tone. You killed your father, Nora. I understand why you're scared, but running won't help. Hiding with strangers won't help. You need family right now. You need someone who understands what you've been through. Still no response. Marcus's patience was wearing thin. Samuel could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched. Last chance, Mr. Reed. Bring her out or we come in and get her. Either way, we're not leaving without her. Then you're not leaving, Samuel said quietly. Marcus stared at him for 5 long seconds, then nodded once, decisively. Your choice. Boys, search the... The crack of a rifle shot cut him off mid-sentence. One of the riders jerked in his saddle and toppled sideways, hitting the ground hard. Blood bloomed across his shoulder where the bullet had caught him high and to the right. Not fatal, but definitely not a warning shot. Everyone spun toward the source of the gunfire, the barn's hayloft where a slim figure was visible behind the open loading door. Nora stood there with Samuel's Winchester, already working the lever action to chamber another round. I said no, her voice carried across the yard, shaking but determined. I'm not going with you, Uncle Marcus. I'm not going anywhere. Samuel's heart sank, even as part of him swelled with pride. She wasn't supposed to reveal herself, wasn't supposed to engage. But she'd made her own choice, and now they'd all have to live with it. Marcus's face went through several expressions before settling on cold fury. You just shot one of my men, girl. He's still alive, Nora called back. The next one won't be if you don't leave. You think you're safe up there? You think that barn will protect you? Marcus gestured sharply, and two of his men started to dismount. Samuel's rifle came up, pointed directly at Marcus's chest. "Tell them to get back on their horses." Marcus didn't even glance at him. "You gonna shoot me in cold blood, old man? That's murder. You'll hang for it." "You're threatening to attack my property and kidnap someone under my protection," Samuel said. "That's self-defense. And out here that means I can shoot you and sleep fine afterward." The two men who dismounted paused, looking to Marcus for direction. The wounded man groaned from where he lay in the dirt, clutching his shoulder. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled rage. 8 armed men against an old rancher and a girl. "You really think you can hold us off?" "Don't need to hold you off forever," Samuel replied. "Just need to hold you off long enough for help to arrive. And I sent word to Martha Conway's ranch an hour ago. She's got 20 armed cowhands who'll be here any minute." It was a bluff. Samuel hadn't sent word to anyone. But Marcus didn't know that, and the flicker of uncertainty that crossed his face told Samuel the lie had landed. "You're lying," Marcus said, but he didn't sound completely sure. "Test me," Samuel suggested. "Start your attack. See how far you get before Conway's men show up and put bullets in all of you." The standoff stretched out, taut and fragile. The wounded man was crying now, high panicked sounds that set everyone's nerves on edge. The horses stamped and snorted, sensing the tension in their riders. Then from behind Marcus and his men came the sound of more horses approaching. A lot of them. Samuel felt a surge of disbelief and hope. Had Martha actually sent help? Had she anticipated this and stationed men nearby? But when the riders came into view, Samuel's hope curdled into dread. It was Dutch Carver and at least 15 more men, not cowhands, but the kind of hard cases you could hire in any frontier town if you had money and no conscience. They rode in fast and loud, whooping and hollering like they were heading to a hanging. Dutch reined up beside Marcus with a grin that showed too many teeth. "Heard you might need some help, Marcus. Thought I'd bring some friends." Marcus's expression was sour. "I told you to stay out of this, Dutch. And miss all the fun? Besides, that girl up there owes me. She killed men I rode with. That's a debt that needs settling." Samuel's odds had just gone from bad to impossible. 20-plus armed men against him and Nora. Even with fortifications, even with determination, the math didn't work. But surrender wasn't an option. Not to men like these. "Nora," Samuel called without taking his eyes off the assembled riders. "Remember what I told you? West to Martha's. Don't stop." "I'm not leaving you," Nora's voice came back, cracking with emotion. "Yes, you are. That's an order." "I don't take orders anymore," she said, and Samuel heard the steel underneath the fear. "I make my own choices, and I choose to stay." Dutch laughed. "Hear that, boys? The little murderer's got spine. That'll make it more interesting when we—" His words were cut off by another rifle shot, this one fired by Samuel. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 inches from Dutch's horse's front hooves, sending the animal into a panicked rear. Dutch barely kept his seat, cursing viciously. "Next one goes through your chest," Samuel said calmly. "Keep talking and find out if I'm bluffing." Dutch's hand moved toward his gun, but Marcus grabbed his arm. "Not yet. We do this smart." "Smart?" Dutch jerked his arm free. "There's 2 of them and 25 of us. We rush them. We're done in 5 minutes." "And how many of us die in those 5 minutes?" Marcus asked coldly. "That old man's not going to go down easy, and the girl's already proved she can shoot. I don't feel like losing half my men to make a point. So what do you suggest?" Marcus dismounted and held his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Mr. Reed, let's be reasonable. You're outnumbered, outgunned. Even if you kill some of us, you're not walking away from this. Neither is the girl, so why not make this easy? She comes with us peacefully. You get to keep breathing. That's the best deal you're going to get." "No deal," Samuel said. "Then you're a dead man." "Maybe, but so are you and Dutch, and whoever's standing closest when the shooting starts." Samuel's voice was steady, but inside his heart was hammering. He was too old for this, too tired. But he'd meant what he'd told Nora. Some things were worth dying for. Marcus shook his head in what might have been genuine regret. "I tried to do this the civilized way. Remember that." He turned to his men and started giving orders. "Jenkins, Carter, circle around to the west side of the barn. Morrison, you and Dutch take the east. When I give the signal, we all move at once. Suppressing fire on the house and barn, but I want the girl alive. Anyone who kills her answers to me." The men started to move, spreading out to surround the property. Samuel's mind raced through scenarios, all of them ending badly. He could hold the porch for maybe 2 minutes. Nora could hold the loft for maybe 3. After that, it was just a matter of numbers and ammunition. He was about to call out to Nora one more time, to beg her to run while she still could, when a new sound cut through the chaos. A steam whistle, loud and close. Everyone froze, confusion replacing aggression for a moment. Steam whistles meant trains or steamboats, neither of which had any business being out here in the middle of nowhere. Then Samuel saw it. A massive wagon cresting the ridge to the north, pulled by 4 enormous draft horses. But it wasn't the wagon that made him stare. It was what the wagon carried. A portable steam engine, the kind used for threshing or sawmill work, mounted on a reinforced flatbed. And surrounding the wagon, riding in formation like a military escort, were at least 30 armed men wearing the distinctive blue kerchiefs of Martha Conway's ranch hands. At the front of this small army, riding a black mare and carrying a rifle like she was born with it, was Martha Conway herself. The wagon rolled into Samuel's yard with the steady inevitability of a landslide. The steam engine hissed and clanked, its presence so bizarre and unexpected that Marcus Lane's men simply stared. Martha reined up between the two groups, her horse dancing sideways as she surveyed the scene with cold eyes. Her men fanned out behind her, rifles ready, but not aimed. Not yet. "Well now," Martha said into the sudden silence. "Looks like I arrived just in time for the party." Marcus found his voice first. "This is none of your business, Mrs. Conway. When 25 armed men surround one of my neighbor's properties with intent to do violence, I'd say that makes it my business." Martha gestured at the steam engine. "Had my boys haul this up from the south pasture, thought we might need to make an impression." "Impressive," Marcus said dryly. "But this is a family matter. That girl killed my brother. I have a right—" "You have the right to wait for the circuit judge like everyone else," Martha cut him off. "What you don't have is the right to form a lynch mob on my watch." Dutch Carver spurred his horse forward. "Your watch? Last I checked, you don't own this county, old woman." Martha's rifle came up so fast Dutch barely had time to flinch. She didn't point it at him. That would have been too provocative, but the threat was unmistakable. "I own enough of it," she said quietly, "and the parts I don't own, I influence. Every ranch within 50 miles, every store, every bank, every supplier. You think you can operate in this county without my say-so? Try it. See how far you get when nobody will hire you, feed you, or shelter you." One of Martha's cowhands, a grizzled man named Dawson, called out cheerfully. "We brought extra ammunition, boss. Want us to start handing it out?" Martha smiled. "Not yet, Dawson. I'm still hoping these gentlemen will see reason and depart peacefully." Marcus's jaw worked silently for a moment. Samuel could see him calculating angles, weighing options. 25 men against 30, but Martha's men had better position, and that ridiculous steam engine that, while not actually weaponizable, created a psychological barrier. "You'd start a range war over this?" Marcus asked finally. "I'd end one," Martha corrected. "Make no mistake, Mr. Lane. You start shooting, my men will finish it, and when the dust settles, I'll make sure everyone from here to San Antonio knows you tried to lynch a 15-year-old girl. That's not a reputation you'll recover from. She murdered 3 men. She defended herself against men who were abusing her. There's a difference, and any jury with half a conscience will see it." Martha's expression softened slightly. "I know loss, Mr. Lane. I know what it's like to want revenge when family's been hurt. But your brother brought this on himself. You want to honor his memory? Leave. Let the law handle this properly. Don't add your name to the list of men who died for a bad cause." The silence that followed was broken only by the hissing of the steam engine and the creak of saddle leather as men shifted nervously. Finally, Marcus Lane let out a long breath and something like defeat crossed his face. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Martha said firmly. "It's over right now. You and your men are going to mount up and ride out. My men will escort you to the county line. And if I ever see you in this territory again without a legal summons, I'll have you arrested for trespassing, threatening behavior, and anything else I can think of." Dutch Carver started to protest, but Marcus cut him off with a sharp gesture. "We're done here." He looked up at the barn loft where Nora still stood with her rifle. "You got lucky, girl. but luck runs out. That sounded like a threat, Mr. Lane, Martha said coldly. Just a fact, Mrs. Conway, just a fact. Marcus swung back into his saddle and gathered his reins. Let's go, boys. The men began to move, reluctant and angry, but obedient. Dutch Carver shot one last venomous look at Samuel before spurring his horse and galloping off. The wounded man was helped onto his horse by two companions, still bleeding but mobile. Martha's cowhands fell in around them, forming a loose escort that was really a guard detail. They herded Marcus Lane's group east, back toward the county line and away from Samuel's ranch. When they were finally out of sight, Samuel felt his legs start to shake. He sat down hard on the porch steps, his rifle clattering beside him. Martha dismounted and walked over, her expression softening for the first time. You all right, Samuel? I am now, thanks to you. He looked up at her. How did you know? I've had men watching the roads for days. When Jesse reported that Marcus Lane had crossed into the county with a small army, I figured you'd need backup. She glanced at the steam engine. The thresher was Jimmy's idea. Thought it might add some psychological weight. Samuel laughed, a shaky sound. It worked. Nora emerged from the barn, still carrying the rifle, but limping badly on her bandaged feet. She looked from Martha to Samuel, her face streaked with tears. Is it really over? She asked. Martha turned to face her, studying the girl with the same careful attention she'd shown before. For now. Marcus Lane isn't the type to let things go, but he's also not stupid enough to challenge me directly. You've got breathing room. Time to get your story straight before the judge arrives. I don't need to get my story straight, Nora said quietly. I just need to tell the truth. Truth is good, Martha agreed. But presentation matters too. Lucky for you, I know a lawyer who's very good at presentation. He'll be here in 2 weeks. Samuel stood on unsteady legs and looked at the small army of cowhands Martha had brought. I owe you more than I can ever repay. You don't owe me anything, Martha said. But if you're looking to balance scales, you can start by taking better care of yourself. You're too old to be getting into shootouts with bounty hunters. I'm not that old, Samuel protested weakly. You're old enough to know better. Martha's expression grew serious. But what you did today, standing up for that girl when you had every reason to walk away, that took courage. Your wife would have been proud. Samuel felt his throat tighten. I hope so. Martha glanced at the sun, which was starting its descent toward the western hills. I need to get back. Make sure Marcus and his boys actually leave the county. But I'm leaving 10 men here. They'll camp on your property for the next few weeks. Consider it insurance. Martha, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm telling. She walked back to her horse and mounted smoothly despite her age. And Nora? Keep practicing with that rifle. You're a decent shot, but decent won't cut it if trouble comes calling again. Nora nodded mutely, overwhelmed. Martha rode off with most of her men, leaving 10 cowhands who immediately began setting up camp near the barn. They worked efficiently, like men who'd done this before, and within an hour they had tents erected and a cooking fire going. Samuel and Nora stood on the porch watching them work, neither quite believing what had just happened. We could have died today, Nora said softly. Yes, but we didn't. No, we got lucky. Nora turned to look at him. It wasn't luck. It was you. You stood there and faced down 25 men because you gave me your word. Nobody's ever done that before. Samuel didn't know what to say to that, so he just put his hand on her shoulder and squeezed gently. That night, for the first time since Nora had arrived, Samuel slept soundly. The presence of Martha's cowhands provided a security he hadn't realized he needed. He dreamed of Sarah and Charlotte, but they were good dreams for once. Dreams where they smiled and told him he'd done well. When he woke the next morning, he found Nora already up and cooking breakfast for the cowhands, eggs and bacon and biscuits that were surprisingly good. The men ate gratefully, joking with her and treating her like a younger sister rather than a fugitive. One of them, a young cowhand named Tommy with red hair and freckles, was showing her a card trick when Samuel emerged from the house. She's quick, Mr. Reed, Tommy said cheerfully. Already figured out how I'm doing it. It's in your left hand, Nora said, smiling. You palm the card when you shuffle. Tommy laughed and revealed the hidden card. Knew I couldn't fool you. Samuel watched the easy interaction and felt something settle in his chest. This was what normal looked like. This was what Nora deserved. Casual kindness, harmless fun, the simple pleasure of being treated like a person instead of property. Over the next week, life developed a new rhythm. The cowhands rotated watch duties, always keeping someone alert for approaching riders. Nora continued learning ranch work, and the cowhands taught her things Samuel didn't know: how to rope, how to read cattle brands, how to predict weather from the color of the sky. She laughed more, smiled more. The hollow look in her eyes gradually filled in with something that looked almost like hope. Samuel found himself thinking about the future for the first time in years. What would happen when the judge came? Would Nora be charged? Would she be acquitted? And if she was, what then? Would she stay on the ranch? Did he want her to? The answer to that last question surprised him with its clarity. Yes, he wanted her to stay. Not out of obligation or duty, but because somewhere in the past few weeks, this scared girl had become something like family. On the 8th day, a rider came from town carrying news. The circuit judge had been delayed by flooding in the southern counties. He wouldn't arrive for another 3 weeks, maybe 4. Samuel wasn't sure if that was good news or bad. More time for Nora to heal and prepare, but also more time for Marcus Lane to plan his next move. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, Nora sat on the porch steps and asked Samuel about the future. What happens if the judge says I'm guilty? Samuel had been dreading this question. Then we appeal. Martha knows lawyers, good ones. And if that doesn't work, then we figure something else out. Nora picked at a splinter in the wooden step. You can't protect me forever. I can try. That's not fair to you. You've already given up so much. Your peace, your safety, maybe your reputation. I haven't given up anything I wasn't willing to lose, Samuel said. And I've gained something too. What? He thought about how to explain it. Purpose, I suppose. For 10 years after Sarah and Charlotte died, I just existed. Went through the motions. The ranch ran itself, the seasons changed, and I was just here. But now I've got a reason to wake up in the morning. Someone who needs me. That's worth more than peace or safety. Nora's eyes filled with tears. I never wanted to be a burden. You're not a burden. You're a gift. Doesn't mean you're easy. Gifts rarely are. But you're still a gift. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, and Samuel thought about how much had changed in just 2 weeks. How much more would change in the weeks to come. The uncertainty should have frightened him, but instead it felt almost like anticipation. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. And somehow, that made all the difference. The lawyer arrived 3 days before the circuit judge was scheduled to reach town. His name was Henry Blackwood, and he looked nothing like what Samuel had expected. Instead of the polished city attorney he'd imagined, Blackwood was a compact man in his 40s with weathered hands and a face that suggested he'd spent as much time outdoors as in courtrooms. He rode up to the ranch alone, carrying a leather satchel and wearing a pistol on his hip like he knew how to use it. Mr. Reed, he said, dismounting with easy grace, Mrs. Conway sent me, said you had a client who needed representation. That would be Nora, Samuel replied, shaking the offered hand. She's in the barn. Blackwood's eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Before I meet her, tell me what I'm walking into. Mrs. Conway gave me the outline, but I need details. They sat on the porch while Samuel laid out the whole story. Thomas Lane's abuse, the men who'd participated, the killing by the creek, Marcus Lane's attempted kidnapping, the standoff with Martha's intervention. Blackwood listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small leather journal. When Samuel finished, Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. This is going to be difficult. Judge Morrison is fair, but he's also old-fashioned. He doesn't like children who kill their parents, regardless of circumstance. She was defending herself, Samuel said sharply. I believe you, but believing and proving are different things in court. The prosecution will argue premeditation. She waited until they were asleep, took a weapon, and executed them. That's not self-defense in the traditional sense. What is it then? Blackwood met his eyes steadily. Survival. But the law doesn't always recognize the difference. Samuel felt his stomach drop. So you're saying she'll hang? I'm saying we need to be smart about how we present this. The facts are on her side if we frame them correctly. But if we go in unprepared, if we let the prosecution control the narrative, then yes, she could hang. What do you need from us? The truth, first, every detail, no matter how ugly. Then, I need Nora to be strong enough to tell that truth in front of a room full of strangers. Can she do that? Samuel thought about the girl who'd stood in the barn loft with a rifle, who'd chosen to stay when she could have run, who'd slowly learned to smile again despite everything. She can do it. Then let me meet her. They found Nora in the corral working with patience, practicing mounting and dismounting. She'd gotten proficient over the past weeks, her movements confident and smooth. But when she saw the stranger with Samuel, her body went rigid with wariness. Nora, this is Henry Blackwood. He's the lawyer Martha sent to help with your case. Blackwood approached the fence slowly, like he was approaching a spooked horse. Miss Lane, I'm here to make sure you get a fair hearing, but I need to ask you some hard questions, questions that might bring up memories you'd rather forget. Are you willing to do that? Nora studied him for a long moment, then nodded. What do you need to know? They spent the next 3 hours in the barn's tack room with Blackwood asking questions in a gentle but thorough manner. He started with easy things, her age, her mother's death, the years before the abuse started. Then he moved into harder territory. When did your father first... Blackwood paused, choosing words carefully. When did the abuse begin? Nora's hands twisted in her lap. 6 months after my mother died. He came into my room one night drunk, said I looked like her, said I could replace her. And the other men, Miller and Cobb, when did they become involved? About a year later, my father owed them money. He offered me as payment. Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but Samuel saw his knuckles go white around his pen. How often did this happen? 2-3 times a week, sometimes more. Nora's voice had gone flat, emotionless. They'd come by the house, or we'd travel to where they were staying. My father would leave me with them and come back in the morning. Did you ever try to tell anyone? A neighbor, a lawman, anyone? Once, when we passed through a town in Missouri, I tried to tell the sheriff there. Nora's laugh was bitter. He asked my father if it was true. My father said I was troubled, that I made up stories for attention. The sheriff believed him. They always believed him. Blackwood made careful notes. The night you killed them. Walk me through exactly what happened. Nora took a shaky breath. We'd been traveling for 2 days. My father said he had a buyer up north, a rancher who wanted a wife. He was going to sell me for $500. Did you know this rancher's name? No, just that he was old and rich and didn't ask questions. Nora closed her eyes. We stopped by the creek to camp. The men got drunk celebrating the sale. Miller said something about maybe they shouldn't sell me after all. Maybe they should keep me for themselves. My father laughed and said maybe they'd do both, collect the money and then steal me back later. Samuel felt sick listening to this. Blackwood's expression remained carefully neutral. They passed out around midnight, Nora continued. I'd been pretending to sleep, waiting. I knew this was probably my last chance. Once they sold me to that rancher, I'd never escape. So I took Miller's gun. He always left it in his holster by his bedroll, and I shot my father first. Why your father first? Because he was the worst. Because he was supposed to protect me, and instead he destroyed me, because I wanted him to know, even for just a second, what he'd done. But tears streamed down Nora's face now. I shot him in the chest, and he woke up and looked at me, and I shot him again. Then what? Miller woke up when he heard the shots. He tried to grab me. I shot him too, 3 times. I kept pulling the trigger until he stopped moving. Nora's voice was shaking now. Cobb ran. He was always the scared one. He ran for the creek and I chased him. He slipped on the rocks and fell, and I was on him before he could get up. I had the knife from the wagon. I stabbed him. I don't know how many times. I just kept stabbing until my arms were too tired to lift the knife anymore. The silence that followed was heavy and painful. Blackwood set down his pen and removed his spectacles, cleaning them slowly. That must have been terrifying, he said quietly. It wasn't terrifying, Nora replied. It was necessary, and it felt right. Does that make me evil? No, Blackwood said firmly. It makes you human. You did what you had to do to survive, and you're allowed to feel however you feel about it. He replaced his spectacles and looked at her seriously. Here's what's going to happen. The prosecutor is going to paint you as a cold-blooded killer. He's going to say you murdered 3 men in their sleep. He's going to use the brutality of Cobb's death against you, say it shows malice and rage beyond self-defense. So I'm going to hang, Nora said dully. Not if I can help it, Blackwood replied. We're going to tell your story exactly as you told it to me. We're going to make that jury understand what you lived through, what you faced, and why you did what you did. We're going to make them see you as a girl who was being sold like cattle and decided to live instead of die slowly. Will it work? I don't know, Blackwood said honestly, but it's the best chance you've got. And Miss Lane, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've defended murderers and thieves and men who deserve to hang. You're none of those things. You're a survivor. And I'm going to make damn sure that jury sees that too. Over the next 2 days, Blackwood drilled Nora on her testimony. He taught her how to speak clearly, how to maintain eye contact, how to stay calm when the prosecutor tried to rattle her. He warned her about the questions that would come, questions designed to make her look like a liar or a seductress or someone who'd invited the abuse. They're going to ask if you ever said no, Blackwood explained. They're going to ask why you didn't run away sooner. They're going to imply that you participated willingly. That's disgusting, Samuel said from where he sat listening. That's law, Blackwood replied grimly, and we need to be ready for it. Nora, when they ask these questions, you tell them the truth. You were 15 years old. You were alone. You had no money, no family, except the man abusing you, nowhere to go. You were trapped, and you did what you had to do to stay alive until you saw a chance to escape. Nora absorbed all of this with a determination that Samuel found both heartbreaking and inspiring. She was still just a child, but the world had forced her to grow up fast and hard. The night before the judge was due to arrive, Samuel found Nora sitting on the porch staring at the stars. Can't sleep? He asked. Too nervous. She glanced at him. What if they don't believe me? Then we appeal, like I said. And if that doesn't work? Samuel sat down beside her. Then we run. I'll pack up what we can carry, and we'll head west. California, maybe, or Mexico, somewhere they can't find us. Nora stared at him. You'd do that? Leave your ranch, your whole life, just to keep me safe? In a heartbeat. Why? I still don't understand why you care so much. Samuel looked out at the land he'd worked for 3 decades. When Charlotte died, I thought the world had ended. I couldn't see any reason to keep going. But Sarah, your face when I found you by that creek reminded me of something she used to say. She said the world was full of darkness, but that just meant the light mattered more. That every small act of kindness was worth 10 acts of cruelty because it took more courage. I don't feel brave, Nora said softly. You are, though. Braver than you know. Samuel turned to face her. And whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the judge decides, I want you to remember something. You survived. Against odds that would have broken most people, you survived. And that's worth celebrating, no matter what comes next. Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, and Samuel put his arm around her like he used to do with Charlotte. They sat there in the darkness, 2 broken people who'd found something like healing in each other's company. The circuit judge arrived at noon the next day in a wagon pulled by 2 gray horses. Judge Morrison was a tall, thin man in his 60s with a white beard and eyes that had seen too much human ugliness to be surprised by anything. He set up court in the town's largest building, a barn that had been converted into a meeting hall for occasions like this. Word had spread about the case, and by the time Samuel and Nora arrived with Blackwood and a protective escort of Martha's cowhands, the barn was packed with spectators. Ranchers and their wives, townspeople, drifters who'd heard about the sensational trial and wanted to see the girl who'd killed her own father. Marcus Lane sat in the front row with Dutch Carver beside him, both men staring at Nora with undisguised hatred. Martha Conway sat on the opposite side, surrounded by her own people, her presence a clear statement of support. The prosecutor was a pinch-faced man named Addison, who looked like he'd been weaned on vinegar. He stood when Judge Morrison called the court to order and immediately launched into his opening statement. Your Honor, this is a simple case. 3 men were murdered in cold blood by the defendant, Nora Lane. She shot 2 of them while they slept, an act of cowardice and premeditation. She stabbed the third with such violence that he bore over 20 wounds. This was not self-defense. This was execution. Blackwood stood for his response. Your Honor, this is indeed a simple case. A 15-year-old girl was being sold like livestock by men who'd been abusing her for years. When she saw her last chance to escape, she took it. That's not murder. That's survival. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Arguments noted. Mr. Addison, call your first witness. The prosecution's case was thin but damning. They called the undertaker who'd examined the bodies, who testified about the bullet wounds and the numerous stab wounds on Cobb's corpse. They called Deputy Pickett, who reluctantly confirmed that Nora had admitted to the killings. They called a man who claimed to have known Thomas Lane and swore he was a devoted father who'd never harm his daughter. Blackwood dismantled that last witness on cross-examination. You say Mr. Lane was devoted to his daughter. When did you last see them together? About 2 years ago, I suppose. And in those 2 years, did you correspond with Mr. Lane? Receive letters about his daughter's well-being? Well, no, but did you ever visit their home, see how they lived? No. Then you have no actual knowledge of their relationship in the 2 years before his death, do you? I suppose not. No further questions. When it came time for the defense, Blackwood called Samuel first. Mr. Reed, tell the court how you found Miss Lane. Samuel described finding the bodies, finding Nora, the state she was in, the torn dress, the bleeding feet, the hollow eyes. He described her confession, her fear, the way she'd expected him to turn her in or hurt her because that's what men had always done. And what did you do instead? Blackwood asked. I gave her shelter, protection, a place to heal. Why? Samuel looked directly at the judge. Because she was a child who'd been through hell, and someone needed to give her a chance to be human again. Addison's cross-examination was brief and dismissive. So you took the word of a girl who'd just admitted to 3 murders and decided to harbor her. Didn't it occur to you that she might be lying? She wasn't lying, Samuel said firmly. I've been around long enough to know truth from fiction. That girl was telling the truth. Or she was very convincing. No further questions. Martha Conway testified next, describing her knowledge of Thomas Lane's character and reputation. He was a drunk and a brute. Everyone in the county knew it. If he'd been treating his daughter the way she claims, I wouldn't be surprised in the least. But you have no direct knowledge of abuse, Addison pressed. No, but I know enough about men like Lane to recognize the pattern. Finally, Blackwood called Nora to the stand. She walked up slowly, wearing a simple dress Martha had provided, her dark hair pulled back neatly. She looked young and scared and completely vulnerable, and Samuel saw several members of the jury shift uncomfortably. Blackwood took her through her testimony gently but thoroughly. The death of her mother, her father's first assault, the years of abuse, the other men, the trip north to sell her, the night she'd decided to fight back. When you shot your father, what were you thinking? Blackwood asked. That I wanted to live, Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. That I deserved to live. That what they were doing to me was wrong, and I didn't have to accept it anymore. Were you afraid? Terrified, but more afraid of what would happen if I didn't act. Do you regret killing them? Nora was quiet for a long moment. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the world is cruel enough to put children in positions where they have to kill to survive. But do I regret saving my own life? No, I don't. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Then Addison stood for cross-examination, and his first question was designed to destroy her. Miss Lane, isn't it true that you could have left at any time? That you chose to stay with your father? I was 15 years old with no money and nowhere to go, Nora replied. Where was I supposed to leave to? Surely there were authorities, churches, charitable organizations. I tried telling a sheriff once. He didn't believe me. After that I learned that no one would help me, that I was on my own. Addison paced in front of her. You claim these men abused you, yet you traveled with them willingly. You made their meals. You shared their camps. Doesn't that suggest a different kind of relationship? Blackwood started to object, but Nora spoke first, her voice suddenly strong. I did those things because if I didn't, They'd beat me. They'd starve me. They'd do worse. You can call it willingness if you want, but I call it survival. I did what I had to do to stay alive one more day, and another day, until I saw a chance to escape. And when that chance came, I took it. By murdering 3 men. By defending myself against 3 men who were going to sell me like an animal, Nora shot back. You want to call that murder? Fine, but I'm still alive, and they got exactly what they deserved. The courtroom erupted in noise, some people shocked, some approving. Judge Morrison banged his gavel until order was restored. Addison tried several more questions, but Nora had found her strength. She answered each one clearly and without apology. She didn't cry or plead. She simply told her truth and dared anyone to call her a liar. When both sides had finished their cases, Judge Morrison called for closing arguments. Addison went first, painting Nora as a cold-blooded killer who'd murdered 3 men in their sleep and then fabricated a story to justify it. Blackwood countered with a passionate defense that laid out the full horror of what Nora had endured and asked the jury a simple question. What would you have done? If you were 15 years old, being sold to a stranger, trapped with no hope of escape, what would you have done? Would you have laid down and accepted your fate? Or would you have fought for your life? He let the question hang in the air. Nora Lane fought. She fought with the only weapons she had, desperation and courage. She fought because the alternative was a living death. And if we condemn her for that, we condemn every person who's ever refused to be a victim. We say that survival is a crime, and that's a verdict I pray this court will never reach. Judge Morrison sent the jury out to deliberate. They were gone for 4 hours. Samuel sat with Nora in a small room off the main hall, holding her hand while they waited. Martha stopped by to offer support. Even some of the cowhands who'd been guarding the ranch came to check on her. When the jury finally returned, everyone filed back into the courtroom. Samuel's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Judge Morrison addressed the jury foreman. Have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. What say you? The foreman, a weathered rancher named Collins, who Samuel knew slightly, stood and unfolded a piece of paper. On the charges of murder in the deaths of Thomas Lane, Robert Miller, and James Cobb, we find the defendant. He paused, and Samuel stopped breathing. Not guilty by reason of self-defense. The courtroom exploded. Half the room cheered. The other half erupted in outrage. Marcus Lane shot to his feet, shouting about injustice and corruption. Judge Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. The verdict stands, Morrison declared. Miss Lane, you are free to go. This court is adjourned. Nora collapsed in Samuel's arms, sobbing with relief. Blackwood was grinning. Martha pushed through the crowd to embrace them both. But Samuel saw Marcus Lane pushing toward them, his face twisted with rage, and Dutch Carver right behind him. Samuel moved to intercept, putting himself between them and Nora. You bought that verdict, Marcus snarled. Conway, money, and influence. That's all this was. That was justice, Samuel replied calmly. Something your brother never gave her. This isn't over, Marcus hissed. That girl's got blood on her hands, and sooner or later, you're going to leave this county and never come back, Martha said coldly, appearing at Samuel's shoulder. Because if I see you within 50 miles of here again, I'll have you arrested for threatening a minor. And unlike the murder charge, that one will stick. Marcus and Dutch stared at her with pure hatred, but they knew they were beaten. They turned and shoved their way out of the courtroom, followed by their supporters. When they were gone, Samuel turned to Nora, who was still crying but smiling through her tears. It's over, he said gently. It's really over. What do I do now? She asked. Whatever you want, Samuel replied. You're free. You can stay at the ranch, or you can leave and start fresh somewhere else. The choice is yours. Nora looked at him, at Martha, at Blackwood, at all the people who'd stood by her. I want to stay, if that's all right with you. More than all right, Samuel said, his own eyes wet now. Welcome home, Nora. The first month after the trial was the hardest, though not in the ways Samuel had expected. The physical threats were gone. Marcus Lane had left the county within days of the verdict, taking Dutch Carver and their hired guns with them. Martha's network of informants confirmed they'd crossed into Kansas and kept going, apparently deciding that pursuing vengeance wasn't worth risking Martha Conway's wrath. But the emotional aftermath was something else entirely. Nora would wake screaming in the night, trapped in dreams where she was back in that wagon, back in those rooms, back in the hands of men who saw her as property. Samuel would hear her from the house and come running to the barn, finding her huddled in the corner of the tack room with the revolver in her shaking hands. "It's over," he'd tell her gently, sitting outside the locked door until she calmed down. "You're safe. They can't hurt you anymore." "I know," she'd whisper back. But my mind doesn't believe it yet. During the day, she threw herself into ranch work with an intensity that worried Samuel. She worked from dawn until she could barely stand, pushing her body past exhaustion like she was trying to outrun something that lived inside her head. "You need to rest," Samuel told her one afternoon when he found her mending fence posts in the blazing heat. "You've been at this for 8 hours straight." "I need to be useful," Nora replied, hammering another nail with more force than necessary. "I need to earn my place here." "You've already earned it, multiple times over." "Have I?" Nora set down the hammer and wiped sweat from her forehead. "Or am I just another burden you've taken on out of pity?" Samuel felt a flash of frustration. "Is that really what you think? After everything we've been through?" "I don't know what to think," Nora admitted, her voice cracking. "For 3 years, my value was measured by what men could take from me. Now I'm supposed to believe I'm worth something just for existing, and I don't know how to do that." Samuel walked over and took the hammer from her hands. "Then let me teach you, the same way I taught you to ride, to shoot, to work this land. Let me teach you that you're worth protecting just because you're you." "How long will that take?" "However long it takes," Samuel replied. "I'm not going anywhere." Martha visited often during those first weeks, bringing supplies, news from town, and a steady presence that seemed to calm something in Nora. She'd lost her own daughter to illness years before, and she and Nora developed a relationship that was part mentorship, part surrogate family. One afternoon, Martha brought fabric and patterns for new dresses. "You can't wear my old work clothes forever," she told Nora. "And you're young. You should have pretty things." Nora touched the fabric hesitantly. "I don't know how to sew very well. My mother tried to teach me, but—" "Then I'll teach you," Martha said firmly. "Every woman should know how to make her own clothes. Makes you independent." They spent hours on Samuel's porch with needle and thread, Martha showing Nora stitches and techniques while Samuel worked nearby. He'd listened to their conversations, Martha telling stories about running her ranch, about the battles she'd fought to be taken seriously in a man's world, about the strength it took to survive loss and keep moving forward. "You remind me of myself at your age," Martha told Nora one day. "Angry at the world, determined to prove you didn't need anyone." "Did it work?" Nora asked. "The proving I didn't need anyone?" "No. Turns out we all need people, whether we want to admit it or not." Martha tied off a thread and examined her work. "But the anger, that's useful if you channel it right. Let it make you strong instead of bitter. Let it drive you to build something good instead of tearing things down." "I don't know if I can do that." "You're already doing it," Martha replied. "Every day you choose to stay here, to work, to heal, that's building. That's choosing life over bitterness." As autumn arrived and the heat began to break, Nora started to change in small but noticeable ways. The nightmares came less frequently. Her smiles came easier. She began to talk about the future in terms that suggested she believed she'd have one. One evening, she asked Samuel about schooling. "I can read and write, but not well," she admitted, "and I never learned much arithmetic beyond basic sums. Do you think, could I learn more?" Samuel looked up from the harness he was mending. "Of course. What brought this on?" Martha was talking about her granddaughter going to a proper school back east, learning history and science and literature. And I realized I've never had that, never had the chance to learn just for the sake of learning. "There's a teacher in town," Samuel said, widow named Mrs. Peterson. "She runs a small school, mostly for ranch children. I could talk to her about you joining." Nora's expression was hopeful but uncertain. "Would people accept me? After the trial, after everything?" "Some will, some won't. But Mrs. Peterson is fair-minded, and you've got the right to an education same as anyone else." "What if Marcus comes back? What if going to town makes me vulnerable?" Samuel set down the harness and faced her directly. Marcus Lane is gone. And even if he comes back, he'll have to go through me, Martha, and half the county to get to you. You can't live your whole life in fear of what might happen. At some point, you need to start living for what you want to happen. Nora considered this. I'm scared. I know, but scared doesn't mean you can't do it. Just means you're doing it afraid. The next week, Samuel rode into town with Nora to meet Mrs. Peterson. The teacher was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened to Samuel's request, then turned to Nora. I've heard about you, Mrs. Peterson said bluntly. The girl who killed her father and 2 others, the trial was the talk of the county. Nora's face went pale, but she held Mrs. Peterson's gaze. Yes, ma'am. That was me. Do you regret it? I regret that it was necessary, but no, I don't regret surviving. Mrs. Peterson nodded slowly. Good. I have no patience for people who lie to make themselves more comfortable. You can attend my school. Classes start at 8 in the morning, 6 days a week. You'll need books, paper, and pencils. Can you afford those? I can provide them, Samuel interjected. I wasn't asking you, Mrs. Peterson said sharply. She looked back at Nora. Well? I'll work for them, Nora said. I can help clean the schoolhouse, haul water, whatever you need. Mrs. Peterson's stern expression softened slightly. That won't be necessary, but I appreciate the offer. You start Monday. As they left the school, Nora was quiet, but Samuel could see the spark of excitement in her eyes. Thank you, she said as they mounted their horses. For what? For believing I deserve this. Education, a normal life. All of it. Samuel gathered his reins. You deserve a lot more than you've gotten so far. I'm just trying to help you catch up. School changed everything for Nora. She attacked her studies with the same intensity she'd brought to ranch work, staying up late by lamplight, practicing her letters, and working through arithmetic problems. Mrs. Peterson proved to be a demanding but fair teacher, pushing Nora to improve while acknowledging the gaps in her education. The other students were a mixed group, some children of wealthy ranchers who could afford to spare their kids from work, some orphans being raised by relatives, some, like Nora, looking for a second chance. A few of them whispered about her at first. The girl who'd killed her father, the murderer. But Mrs. Peterson shut that down fast. In this schoolhouse, we judge people by their actions here and now, she announced one morning when she'd overheard gossip. Miss Lane has been acquitted by a court of law and has shown nothing but dedication to her education. If any of you have a problem with her presence, you can take it up with me. Otherwise, keep your mouths shut and your minds on your lessons. After that, the whisper stopped, and gradually, Nora began to make friends. There was Sarah, a 12-year-old whose parents had died in a fire and who lived with her aunt. There was Thomas, a quiet boy who loved books and shared his favorites with Nora. There was Marie, outspoken and fearless, who declared that any girl tough enough to survive what Nora had survived was someone worth knowing. Samuel would watch Nora ride off to school each morning and return each afternoon, and he'd see the transformation happening slowly but surely. She was becoming herself. Not the broken girl he'd found by the creek, not the terrified defendant in the courtroom, but someone new, someone whole. Winter came hard that year with snow that piled up 3 feet deep and temperatures that made water freeze solid in the buckets overnight. School closed for 2 weeks during the worst of it, and Nora helped Samuel keep the ranch running through the brutal cold. They worked side by side, breaking ice on the water troughs, hauling feed to cattle that couldn't reach grazing, reinforcing barn walls against the howling wind. It was hard work, exhausting work, but there was something satisfying about it too. The simple pleasure of accomplishing necessary tasks together. One night, snowed in and sitting by the fire in the house, Nora had started sleeping in the spare bedroom rather than the barn as winter set in. They talked about the future. What do you want to do? Samuel asked. After school, I mean. Have you thought about it? Nora stared into the flames. Sometimes I think about becoming a teacher, like Mrs. Peterson. Helping other kids who've had hard lives get an education. That's a good goal. But then I think maybe I want to stay here, help run the ranch, learn everything you know about the land and cattle and horses. She glanced at him. Is that stupid? To want something so ordinary after everything that happened? It's not stupid at all, Samuel replied. Ordinary is what you've never had. Makes sense you'd want it. What about you? What do you want? Samuel thought about that. I want to see you happy, settled, building a life that's yours, not one that was forced on you. Beyond that, I'm pretty content with things as they are. You don't get lonely, living out here by yourself all these years? I did, Samuel admitted, before you came. The loneliness was like a weight I carried everywhere, but now, he smiled at her, now I've got family again, family. And that's more than I ever hoped for. Nora's eyes filled with tears. You really think of me as family? I do, if you'll have me. She crossed the room and hugged him tightly. I never had a real father, not one who protected me or cared about me or wanted what was best for me. But if I could choose one, it would be you. Samuel held her and thought about Charlotte, about Sarah, about all the years of grief and emptiness. This didn't erase that pain, didn't replace what he'd lost, but it filled something that had been hollow for too long. Spring arrived with wildflowers and new calves and Nora's 16th birthday. Martha threw a party at her ranch, inviting half the county. It was the first birthday Nora could remember celebrating, and she cried when Martha presented her with a beautiful new saddle. Every rancher needs their own saddle, Martha said gruffly, embarrassed by Nora's tears. Can't keep borrowing Samuel's forever. The party was full of music and food and people who'd come to care about Nora over the past year. Mrs. Peterson was there with a stack of books. The cowhands who'd guarded Samuel's ranch brought small gifts. Even Henry Blackwood made an appearance, traveling from 2 counties over to attend. As Samuel watched Nora laugh with her friends, watched her dance with Tommy the red-headed cowhand, watched her simply exist in a space where she was safe and valued and celebrated, he felt a deep sense of peace. This was what victory looked like. Not the courtroom verdict, though that mattered. But this. A young woman who'd survived hell and come out the other side whole enough to laugh, to dance, to dream about tomorrow. Summer brought new challenges and new growth. Nora finished her first full year of school at the top of her class. Mrs. Peterson pulled Samuel aside one afternoon and told him that Nora had real talent, especially for literature and writing. She should consider continuing her education, Mrs. Peterson said. There are teaching colleges back east that would be lucky to have her. Samuel passed this along to Nora that evening. Leave? She said, surprised. Go back east? Only if you want to, but Mrs. Peterson thinks you've got potential. Seems a shame to waste it. Nora was quiet for a long time. A year ago, I couldn't imagine having any future at all. Now I have too many options, and I don't know which to choose. That's a good problem to have, Samuel pointed out. Is it, though? What if I choose wrong? What if I leave and regret it? Or stay and wonder what I missed? Samuel sat down beside her on the porch steps. Here's what I learned over the years. There's no perfect choice. Every path has trade-offs, but the important thing is making your own choice based on what you want, not what you think you should want or what would make other people happy. What do you want me to do? I want you to be happy, Samuel said simply. Whether that's here on this ranch, in a teaching college back east, or somewhere I haven't even thought of, your happiness is what matters to me. I don't know what makes me happy yet, Nora admitted. I'm still figuring out who I am without all the trauma defining me. Then take your time figuring it out. You're 16. You've got years to decide. As summer turned to autumn again, Nora seemed to settle into a comfortable rhythm. She continued school, continued working the ranch, continued growing into herself. The nightmares were rare now, coming only occasionally when stress or memories triggered them. She'd learned to manage her fear, to recognize it without letting it control her. One afternoon in late October, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Samuel's hand went immediately to his rifle, old reflexes kicking in. But the rider was alone and clearly not a threat, an older woman dressed in traveling clothes, her horse laden with saddlebags. I'm looking for Nora Lane, the woman called out. I was told she lives here. Nora emerged from the barn, curious and cautious. I'm Nora Lane. The woman dismounted stiffly and studied Nora's face. You look like your mother. Same eyes. Same chin. Nora went very still. You knew my mother? I'm Margaret Harrison, your mother's sister, your aunt. Samuel moved closer, protective instincts engaged. Where have you been for the past 3 years? Margaret's expression was pained. I didn't know. I've been in Oregon, running a boarding house. I didn't know my sister had died. Didn't know what happened to Nora. I only found out last month when a letter from a friend in Missouri finally reached me. She'd heard about the trial, put the pieces together. I came as fast as I could. Nora stared at this woman who claimed to be family. Why should I believe you? Because I have this. Margaret pulled a small photograph from her pocket. It showed two young women, clearly sisters, smiling at the camera. One of them looked exactly like Nora. Nora took the photograph with shaking hands. That's her. That's my mother. Taken about 20 years ago, before either of us married. Before life got complicated. Margaret's voice was thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, Nora. If I'd known what was happening, I would have come sooner. I would have taken you away from him. But you didn't know, Nora said quietly. No. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Margaret took a step closer. But I'm here now, and I want to make things right, if you'll let me. I know I have no right to ask, but I'd like to get to know you, to be part of your life if you're willing. Nora looked at Samuel, uncertainty clear on her face. Your choice, Samuel told her gently. Nora turned back to Margaret. You can stay for dinner, or we can talk, but I'm not making any promises beyond that. That's more than fair, Margaret agreed. Over dinner, Margaret told them about her life in Oregon, about her husband who died 2 years earlier, about the boarding house she ran for travelers and workers. She asked Nora careful questions about her education, her interests, her life on the ranch. Samuel's been good to you, Margaret observed. He saved my life, Nora replied simply, in more ways than one. Margaret stayed for 3 days, getting to know Nora, earning her trust slowly. Before she left, she made an offer. I'd like you to come visit me in Oregon, not to stay, just to visit. See a different part of the country. Meet some of your mother's family. You have cousins you've never met. And if you decide you want to stay longer, to live there and maybe attend school there, you'd be welcome. Nora didn't answer immediately. That night, she talked it over with Samuel. Part of me wants to go, she admitted. To know more about my mother, to meet family who might actually care about me. But part of me is terrified to leave here. This is the first place I've ever felt safe. Oregon isn't forever, Samuel pointed out. It's just a visit. And safety isn't a place. It's something you carry with you. You've learned how to protect yourself, how to trust your instincts, how to be strong. That doesn't go away just because you cross state lines. Will you be here when I come back? I'll be here, Samuel promised. This is your home as long as you want it to be. In the spring, Nora traveled to Oregon with Margaret. Samuel rode with them to the train station, helped load Nora's trunk, full of new clothes Martha had helped her make, and said goodbye without making it dramatic. Learn things, he told her. Experience the world. Write me letters so I know you're all right. I'll write every week, Nora promised. She hugged him tightly. Thank you for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for protecting me when I couldn't protect myself, for teaching me that I'm worth protecting. You always were, Samuel replied. I just helped you see it. He watched the train pull away, carrying Nora toward new experiences and possibilities, and he felt the bittersweet ache of letting go mixed with pride at how far she'd come. The letters arrived regularly, as promised. Nora wrote about Oregon, about her cousins, about the boarding house and the small school she'd started attending. She wrote about missing the ranch, but also about discovering new interests: photography, marine biology, the ships that came into port. Samuel wrote back, telling her about the ranch, about Martha's latest schemes, about the small changes happening in the county. He told her she was missed, but encouraged her to explore, to take her time, to figure out what she wanted. After 6 months, Nora returned for a visit. She stepped off the train looking older somehow, more confident. She'd grown her hair longer and wore it in a style Samuel didn't recognize. She carried herself differently, still careful, still watchful, but with an ease that suggested she'd learned to trust the world a little more. You look good, Samuel told her as they rode back to the ranch. I feel good, Nora replied. Oregon is beautiful. My aunt is kind. My cousins are fun, but it's not home. Not like here is home. She looked out at the familiar landscape, the endless grass, the distant hills, the sky that went on forever. I think I want to come back. Not right away. I want to finish school there, learn more about photography, but after that I want to come back here. Samuel felt warmth spread through his chest. The ranch will be here. I'll be here. I was thinking, Nora continued hesitantly, maybe I could start a school here eventually, for ranch children who can't afford to board in town. Teach them reading and writing and arithmetic during the slow seasons. Use what I'm learning to help others. That's a fine idea, Samuel said, and maybe I could document the ranching life through photography. Show people back east what it's really like out here. Tell stories that need telling. You've been thinking about this a lot. I have, because for the first time in my life, I get to choose my future. And I choose this. I choose home. They spent 2 weeks together before Nora had to return to Oregon to finish her schooling. They rode the property, worked cattle, sat on the porch talking until the stars came out. It was like the old days, but different too. Equals now, partners in preserving this place they both loved. On her last night before leaving again, they sat by the creek where Samuel had found her 2 years earlier. The bodies were long gone, the blood washed away by rain and time. It was just a creek again, peaceful and ordinary. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Nora asked quietly. "Sometimes," Samuel admitted. "Do you?" "All the time. I think about how close I came to just walking into the water and disappearing, how easy it would have been to give up." She picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in her hands. "And then I think about how you showed up, how you could have turned me in or chased me off, but you didn't. How that one choice changed everything." "I made the only choice I could live with," Samuel said. "I know, but it was still a choice. You chose to help me when you had every reason not to, and that choice gave me a life I never thought I could have." She threw the stone into the creek, watching the ripples spread outward. "I'm going to make that same choice now. I'm going to choose to help others the way you helped me. I'm going to build something good with the life you gave back to me." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. "You're going to do remarkable things, Nora Lane." "We're going to do remarkable things," she corrected. "Together." 3 years later, Nora returned to the ranch for good, bringing with her a teaching certificate, a portfolio of stunning photographs, and plans for the school she wanted to build. She'd grown into a young woman of 20, strong and capable and unafraid. The school opened that fall in a building they constructed together on the edge of Samuel's property, close enough to be convenient, far enough to be its own thing. Nora taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and geography to children from ranches across the county. She taught them on their own terms, understanding that these kids needed education that fit their lives, not some Eastern ideal. She also began documenting the ranching community through her photographs, capturing the hard work, the beauty, the complicated reality of frontier life. Her images began appearing in newspapers and magazines back east, telling stories that changed how people thought about the West. Martha invested in both ventures, providing funding and resources. "Best investment I've ever made," she'd say. "That girl's going to change this county." And she did. Over the years, Nora's school grew, educating hundreds of children who might otherwise have gone without. Her photographs brought recognition to the region, attracting settlers and investment. She became a voice for women's rights, for children's protection, for education reform. But she never forgot where she started. By a creek, broken and terrified, saved by an old rancher who chose kindness over convenience. Samuel lived to see it all. He worked the ranch until he was 70, then gradually turned more of the operations over to Nora, who'd proven herself as capable as any rancher in the county. He spent his later years watching with pride as the girl he'd saved built a life that mattered, that helped others, that made the world a little better. When he died at 74, peacefully in his sleep, the funeral was attended by hundreds, ranchers and teachers, students and cowhands, people whose lives Nora had touched, and who understood that Samuel's legacy lived on through her. Nora stood at his grave and thought about the morning he'd found her, about all the moments since then that had led here. She thought about the choice he'd made to help a stranger, and how that choice had rippled outward, changing not just her life, but countless others. She'd inherited the ranch, as he'd intended. But more than that, she'd inherited his belief that kindness mattered, that protecting the vulnerable was worth any cost, that one person's choice could change everything. Years later, when Nora was an old woman herself, she'd sit on that same porch and tell her story to students, to journalists, to anyone who'd listen. She'd talk about survival and choice and the power of compassion. She'd show them the photograph she kept framed on the mantel, Samuel and her standing together in front of the ranch house, both smiling, both whole. "He gave me back my life," she'd say, "not just by protecting me, but by teaching me I was worth protecting. And I've spent every day since then trying to honor that gift by passing it on." The ranch still stood, run by Nora's nephew now. The school still operated, teaching a fourth generation of ranch children. And the photographs Nora had taken hung in museums and libraries, permanent testaments to the life and community she'd documented. But more than any of that, her story endured. The girl who was 15 until the day she chose to fight back, and the rancher who chose to stand beside her. A story about survival and redemption, about the families we choose and the futures we build when given a chance. A story that proved over and over that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply refuse to let cruelty have the final word. And in the end, that refusal, that choice to stand against darkness and build something good, was the truest victory of all.